despite how cold it was this morning. Our agenda for tonight is we're going to have Bill Hunter give us an update on the scholarship program. Ursula McCready from Performance Power will be here to give us an update on a new initiative, Women in Mission Critical. This is something that's taken off across the country. Ursula has graciously agreed to spearhead our efforts in that area. And then we have a presentation from Cummins Northwest. Well, they're not Cummins Northwest anymore. Cummins, we'll just call them Cummins. How's that? And then we have a panel discussion after the break. So, Bill, are you ready? Oh, you're plugged into something.
All right. As it updates, I'll start. I'm going to mute that thing. All right. Greetings, everybody. My name is Bill Hunter. I am the chapter vice president for Sub 24 Northwest. And I want to talk a little bit about our scholarship program. So for the last 18 months, well, first I want to take an opportunity to thank Lee Moss, Carrie Nicholas, Elizabeth Sharp, and Dan Guglielmo for their efforts in this initial endeavor. If I can just make sure I've got the right thing going on here. So I can read it would be helpful. I want to thank all those folks for their help during our initial phases of our scholarship program. I want to ask you all for your help as we move forward. The scholarship committee will be reviewing applications and can use your experience and feedback as we hope to see the number of applicants for this scholarship fund in this initial stage of funding moving forward. To that end, please reach out to either myself, Jim Svoboda, or Lee Moss if you're interested in helping us with this. Now, over the past 18 months, the scholarship committee under the leadership of Lee Moss has reached out to a variety of colleges and universities across the state of Washington. And as you can imagine, due to the challenges we've had over the last few years, has had limited response back. So, we did finally get the Shoreline College up in Shoreline, Washington, to actually respond, and we've been working with them to put together a memorandum of agreement. Last week, the board ratified that agreement. Now we're working on the next steps. Our next opportunity to provide funding for 2 scholarships will be in February of 2023. Let's see. So that's where we're at. And what we're doing, again, as I said, we're initial funding 2 scholarships of $2,500 each for the next academic year for deserving and qualified applicants. Now, we've got the general requirements for scholarships at just about any college in the state of Washington, at least, is they have to have a certain grade point average. They have to be a full-time student. They either have to be U.S. citizen, DACA, naturalized, on a green card, something along those lines. So all those things are done by Shoreline as they first vet the applicants for any scholarship through the foundation. We have a primary focus of STEM, people who are interested in STEM, and demonstrates an interest in the data center industry, which is kind of where our focus is. That doesn't necessarily mean that somebody has to go into the data center industry to qualify for one of these scholarships, however. We are going to ask them 5 questions that we'd like them to provide an essay answer to. Some of them you're going to look at me and go, what? Huh? But those of us who've been in the industry for a while, and anybody says to you, I work in data centers, and you go, huh? So first one is, what are your educational goals as it relates to STEM? Everybody know what STEM stands for? Close to the mic. Thank you, Leonard. Everybody here knows. Anybody doesn't know what STEM is? Okay. What are your educational goals as it relates to STEM? What is the life experience or experiences that have caused you to become interested in STEM? What is a data center? That's the one I hoped everybody would go. How do you think STEM applies to data centers, their technology and infrastructure? And how do you see the role of data centers in modern society? And where could you see yourself as a professional in the data center industry? So those are basically what we're going to start asking people to say, you know, are you interested? Do you have an understanding of what we're talking about? And by that, the scholarship committee would be making recommendations to the board as to whom to award the scholarships to. So just to give you a little bit of background on Shoreline, the scholarship foundation there, Shoreline Foundation, is a 501c3 organization. So any donations made to this organization are fully tax deductible under the current IRS code. We chose this route as opposing to create a separate 501c3 for a couple of reasons. Mostly it eliminated the need for the chapter to set up an administrative arm or group and handle the administrative and legal hurdles, as well as the required IRS reporting that comes along with having a 501c3 registration. This arrangement allows us to take advantage of the fact that any company, any individual can make a donation to the Shoreline Foundation in our scholarship name, and they still receive a full tax deduction under their 501c3 designation. So if any of you have companies or are working with companies that are interested in donating or have donation programs or have giving programs that are part of, you know, being able to utilize a 501c3, please let us know. Again, you can get a hold of Jim or myself or Lee Moss or any of the board members actually. Let's see. Now, the scholarship committee will be ramping up again early next year to review hopefully the plethora of applications we get for this scholarship fund. And if any of you are interested in participating in that process, we'd be more than happy to have a discussion with you and get you involved. Any questions about that? Ursula. We have not done that yet. Certainly, I think there's some outreach, and there's more outreach for not only scholarship, but WIMCO that has to include high schools. But again, we just got this thing off the ground. So we're kind of in the early days of this. But ultimately, yeah, we'd like to expand and be able to say, hey, high school advisors, hey, you know, Shoreline college advisors, here's an opportunity for students that may be interested in STEM, data centers, technology, to, you know, to basically get some of their tuition and books paid for. This particular scholarship would be for both tuition and books, which if you haven't been to college in a while, they're blasted expensive. So that answer, if that answers your question? Yes, please. Anybody else? I can't see the screen, so I don't know if anybody is on the Teams meeting to raise their hand. Okay. With that, thank you very much.
All right, Ursula, this is your time. And this is Ursula McCready from Performance Power Concepts. And as I said earlier, she's graciously volunteered to spearhead our Women in Mission Critical initiative.
Well, hey, everyone. It's so great to see everyone's faces. I know all of us are super excited to kind of be back in person. I mean, I am. Yeah, no, I'm really excited. I was lucky enough to be appointed to this, and I put this slide deck together really fast as a last minute ask. So if there's any typos, I'm going to apologize in advance. So just really quick, I'm gonna fly through this pretty quickly, but really just wanted to give you a high level of what has been discussed for the vision that we collectively have for the WIMCO chapter here in the Pacific Northwest. So a show of hands, does everyone kind of know about the WIMCO initiative that 7x24 is pushing? Just yay, nay, yes, maybe, kind of. Okay, see a couple hands. So up on the board or on your screen, this is the international vision statement. So really the biggest points to point out is the goal here is to help recruit women into the 7x24 program, promote mission critical opportunities for women as a whole, leadership opportunities in this industry as well. And again, kind of what Bill was echoing on, really help drive STEM initiatives, scholarships, and programs. So definitely want to help with that as well. Speaking from personal experience, I've been doing this for 13 years. And as kind of in this room, there's a couple of females in here and everyone else is male, which is totally fine. But we'd love to see more women involved in these types of organizations, because I'm sure all of you have female counterparts in your office, in your jobs, and yet we hardly see them out at these types of events. So I think on the whole, really get females to get involved in these programs, because I think a lot of them have unique perspectives that we bring to this industry that just really aren't being talked about. Kind of diving into kind of what that looks like for us here in the Northwest. You know, we are a melting pot of diversity here in the greater Seattle area. And I would love to see that reflected in the 7x24 chapter. So although WIMCO obviously has a emphasis in women in mission critical, I think this is a really great opportunity for not just the women, but for the guys to have just a thoughtful conversation of how do we get our female counterparts out here? How do we get them engaged and involved? Just because, you know what, girls are fun, so we can hang out too. So obviously I am the chair, but the positions that we'd obviously be looking to fill is kind of to have a secretary, someone to help spearhead events. And again, just really driving membership for WIMCO, which is obviously going to be a division of the greater 7x24 chapter as a whole. So, I mean, I think the conversation here is, who do you know? Like, who would want to be involved in something like this, get out to some of the events, help drive really thoughtful conversations like, hey, as a girl, what do you wear to a data center? Guys don't bring scrunchies with them to data centers because they don't have to worry about their hair whipping around. Well, except if you have a beard. Yeah, I mean, I'm not, no, you're 100%, sir. Yes, that's important for men, some men too, who still have hair and beards. But if, you know, all of us have been in a data center, like your hair goes crazy, or, you know, if you're wearing, you know, a necklace, nobody talks about, hey, probably a bad plan if you're leading in to look at the battery date code to have a necklace that might swing in there. Again, things that you guys generally don't think about that impact us as females, your counterparts in the industry. Just no one thinks to talk about those things. So that is really what I would like to drive. And I would love for the guys to be a part of that conversation as well. So I think the biggest message here is, when we're thinking about membership for this program, this isn't just for the women. This can really help drive maybe some of the mentorship conversations that you may be having in your own organizations as well. So just again, as we start sending out communications for membership on this, I would love to see everyone pass this to their female counterpart in their office and be like, hey, did you know this is happening? Maybe you should check it out. So my personal goals for next year would be for the WIMCO division of this chapter to help support a local event such as International Data Center Day. I'm sure a few of you out there have probably seen this come across your LinkedIn feed, or you've heard about it, or your organization has been a part of it. And I would love to see this organization put that together. I have seen other 7x24 and been to other 7x24 chapter events where, you know, they really engage not just the data centers, but some of the electrical contractors, some of the design engineering firms. This is something where we can really have an opportunity for all of us to just talk about what is mission critical as a whole. I think there's so many verticals other than data centers that we can get together and talk about that have all of these really great opportunities to have like a collective of sharing ideas that still kind of tie back to all of these mission critical products and services that we're all interested in talking about, especially as new different type of technologies are really coming out today. And like I mentioned earlier, mentorship I think is so huge. You know, I have a business degree. I would not be in this industry if it wasn't for the amazing men in my career that took me under their wing and really took me aside and didn't mansplain the problem, but really sat down. I'm like, okay, Ursula, yes, the UPS is an alarm. Okay, let's talk about why. You know, let's talk about harmonics. You know, all these different things that they didn't have to. They could have just told me the answer to the problem in that moment, but they really took the time to sit me down. And I, in turn, took the time to actually absorb all that information and apply it. And I guess my way of paying that forward is to try and help others really have that opportunity to have that mentorship, to get out here and really just have a voice in this industry. So I kind of wanted to wrap up with a quote from the dear Dolly Parton. If your actions create a legacy that inspires others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are an excellent leader. Thank you. Any questions? Thanks, you guys.
Next up, we have Rich Scroggins from Cummins. He's going to talk to us about decarbonizing. What are we decarbonizing, Rich? Data center power. Is it going to stop there? We're going to do others. Is it going to stop there? We're going to do others.
Sure, we'll keep going. How much time do we have? This one. Actually, let me get it out of no, I think it'll work like this. Well, hello. Good evening. My name is Rich Scroggins. I work for Cummins in the Twin Cities. Some of our local people here in the Pacific Northwest invited me to come out and present. I think we at Cummins want to have a greater greater level of participation here in the 7x24 in the Northeast region. So I think this was a good way for us to start getting more of involvement. So my role is I'm a technical advisor on our data center market team. I'm based in Minnesota, which is our power generation headquarters. So part of this role is to understand where data center power systems are going in the future, what kind of products and technologies the data center industry is going to need, and then make sure that we are making the right investments. So what I'd like to talk about today is decarbonization in data centers and what that will mean. So as I'm sure you've all probably heard maybe more than you want to, data centers are prioritizing decarbonization. They have a lot of them have very aggressive sustainability goals that they're going to decarbonize. They're going to eliminate diesel generator sets by 2030, and so that's something that kind of gets me interested when they say that. So what does it mean? What will it mean? How will that impact data centers? So that's what I want to talk about a little bit today is the move to decarbonize, how that will cause an evolution of data center power systems over time, and what some of the requirements are. So we'll see different types of energy sources rather than just prime power from the utility, backup power from a diesel generator set, different types of sources will have to be integrated together in that power system. So you're going to need some kind of intelligence, microgrid controls. So I talk about that a little bit, and also introduce Cummins' Power Integration Center, and what that basically is a microgrid lab. So we can test lots of different types of power generating assets, different operating sequences, different architectures, and also to invite all of you to come out and see it sometime in Minnesota. Probably not in these winter months, but that is a serious invitation. We do want to bring customers and delivery partners into the lab to test different types of equipment and different types of operating sequences. So what's going on in data center world? Well, as we look at data center power systems, we see three drivers shaping on-site data center power, see three market drivers. And the first, as I touched on, is decarbonization. Data centers they all have their ESG goals, and a lot of it is to lower the carbon intensity of their power system, and that includes both prime power and standby power. So that's something that we see driving changes. Also, local regulation. So a little different than decarbonization, but emissions, specifically with diesel gensets, NOx emissions, oxides of nitrogen. As I'm sure you're aware, many data center builds are being curtailed because of local air permitting requirements. The data centers are getting so big, they need to stay. The need to stay under some 100 tons per year of NOx is starting to limit the amount of hours that they can actually run their generator sets, and that limit gets so small as to be unreasonable. So then that limits their build. So that's a second factor that's shaping how data center designs will evolve. And those two factors will drive this third factor here, which I call as use case shift. And so when I talk about use case, it's how you're actually using your power system. So today, prime power comes to the utility, backup power comes to a diesel generator set. Diesel generator set only runs when the utility is out. So that's the standby power use case. These market forces we expect them to start having data centers adopt different types of use cases. So we're going to look at that. So as we kind of look at how these power systems will evolve, we've created this chart here to help illustrate that. So what we're looking at here is on the horizontal axis, we're looking at the carbon intensity of your power source. So on the left, we have very carbon intense fuel like burning diesel fuel or coal for your prime power. Towards the right, it is more of a clean power source, so hydrogen-based fuel or something like that. On the vertical axis, this is where we look at operating hours of your on-site power. So down at the bottom is very low hours, and again, that's where we are today. You're only running your on-site power source in the event of a utility outage with some hours for testing, versus at the top would be a prime power operation 24/7. So how we see things, well, first of all, today we're in the lower left corner with backup power. It's a fossil fuel source. It's a diesel generator set, and it runs very little hours. So in time, as we start to have cleaner fuels, we start to see that move a little bit to the right. And we're seeing that already today with the advent of HVO fuels or hydrotreated vegetable oil fuels. Just to show of hands, how many are at least familiar with HVO fuels or have heard about it? Okay, about half. So just a quick, just going over it quickly, what that is, it's a synthetic diesel. It's a fuel that's created from bio waste or oils. It's similar to biodiesel, but it's treated differently. It has the same feedstocks as a lot of biodiesels have, but an important difference is the way that it's treated. It doesn't decay or doesn't attract bacteria. So it's a much more stable fuel. So those of you who are familiar with biodiesel, biodiesel's not really suitable for standby operation because it can't sit in a tank for months because bacteria will gather. HVO, hydrotreated vegetable oil, is different than that. So it is suitable for standby operation. And it literally is a drop-in replacement for diesel. If you have diesel in your tank, you can top it off with HVO, and you'll have very minimal to no difference in performance. You have the same emissions performance. You can, under the EPA, you can use the same emissions data sheet, so all your certifications apply. So that's kind of a first step. It's kind of a bridge where it's, so we're moving a little bit to the right. We're moving a little bit towards cleaner fuels. We're not changing the operation with HVO. One thing HVO doesn't do is it doesn't improve NOx emissions significantly from diesel. So you're not going to see it going to HVO, allowing you to do more operations where you can run more than just in an emergency situation. But as we get farther out into the future, we will see some of that. So kind of my next point on the graph is it's much further to the right. And what I'm getting at there is a use of a hydrogen fuel. So typically a hydrogen fuel cell, a proton exchange membrane fuel cell that doesn't have that level of emissions. So it's a much cleaner source. And because it doesn't have the NOx emissions, that permitting isn't a problem. So you can run beyond just emergency standby. You will be able to run in kind of demand response or maybe with fast frequency response. So we're showing it, I'm showing it going up on this graph, introducing more operating hours. Notice that I'm not moving it all the way to the top. We don't expect that data centers are going to want to own prime power assets. They're not going to want to run their on-site power sources. They're not power companies. They don't want to be power companies. We may see some exceptions to that as we start to build out data centers where the utilities are constrained. For example, those of you who follow it, we're seeing a lot of that in Dublin. There's a lot of discussion of that the data center industry is outpacing utilities. Probably some of you have heard about Dominion Power limiting power to that region due to actually that's due to transmission, not so much due to generation. So there may be some instances where data centers will have to at least temporarily, so it may be a large rental opportunity to generate prime power, but that's not the direction they really want to go. So we still see data centers wanting to get their prime power from a utility or for an independent power producer. So what do these power sources look like? So today you have your prime power from the utility, backup power from a generator set. So as we move forward, we will likely see lots of different energy sources providing power to a data center. So on this graph here on the right, we still have generator sets up on the top of the graph. We show just little graphics of photovoltaic and wind. So we expect that what I'm representing there is those likely are not power sources that are on the data center site, but those would be things that are off-site. And as I had mentioned, so what that would be a function of data centers working with the utilities or working with independent power producers to provide them with a lower carbon source of power. So an impact of that, however, will be with these renewables, with the photovoltaic and wind. There's some intermittency there, as we're all aware. It's not going to be a constant 24/7 source of power. There's intermittency, so you need to supplement that power source somehow. And there's also a little less stability, a little less inertia, so that they aren't going to be as stiff a source as a conventional utility. And so when you have that type of sources, you will usually need to supplement that with a battery, energy storage on the site to kind of supplement that. So when you have your renewables aren't available, you need some other source of power, and you may need those batteries to help firm the grid. If they don't have the same kind of ability to pick up transient loads. So we see batteries. We also we're expecting, and the data center industry is expecting fuel cells to have a role to play. in coming years. And so on this chart, we're showing a hydrogen-based fuel cell, proton exchange membrane fuel cell running off hydrogen. So it's a very clean source. It's as a source that this could be another discussion, but that source is as clean as the hydrogen it burns. So that's something that you know, a factor a factor in decarbonizing of data centers is the hydrogen ecosystem. And we're not, that's kind of outside the scope of the discussion here, but that's an important point. So we have these different sources in our power system that are going to have to be able to interact with each other. So we have rotating machines like your generator, but we also have a lot of inverter-based power. We have, our photovoltaics are being fed from an inverter. Wind power, it ultimately becomes an inverter, right? It's first converted from a windmill, it's converted to DC and then inverted back to AC. And fuel cells and batteries natively operate on AC. So we have these, so we have inverters. Their characteristics are going to be very different than a generator set. So you'll need to have some smart controls to be able to cause all these inverter-based and rotating machine sources to work together, right? They'll have different load following characteristics, different short circuit ratios, different fault characteristics, and so there needs to be some smart control to make them all work together. And I think the best analogy, if those of you who have worked in power generation, if you've ever paralleled diesel generators and gas generators together, it's kind of along those lines. The diesel generators will respond much more quickly than gas generators. And it's similar if you have, say, a fuel cell and a generator on a site together. The fuel cell does not have the same load following characteristics as a generator, so it needs to be supported by a battery, and you need to find ways to have all those assets, all those inverters playing nicely together. So the ability to integrate different types of power sources becomes important in the future. Along with that, the data center industry is going to, with these different types of assets, will want different sequences of operations. So today the sequence of operations is, it's very simple. If the utility fails, your diesel generator sets start and come online. If you have a parallel system, they sync, they parallel. It becomes a little more complicated when you have different sources of energy. So just first off, talking about inverters, some inverters may be grid forming, some inverters may be grid following. So you will need to make sure you're connecting, when the bus is dead, you're connecting your grid forming inverters or some other power source before you have any grid following inverters connected to the bus. Also, if you have these different assets, how you optimize these assets is going to require different types of operating sequences. So typically what we're showing here, just as an example, we have a system with photovoltaic and energy storage and a utility. So typically what you're going to want to have here, you're going to want to maximize the power you're getting from your photovoltaic and let the battery and the utility pick up the slack. So the battery can be either charged or discharged, and so the utility can you can control the amount of power from the utility, so you're optimizing the state of charge of the battery while meeting any grid code requirements that you have with the utility. Optimization, it's going to depend on what types of utility programs are available. So different utilities will have different programs. In some cases, there'll be value in having a demand response where you disconnect from the utility and run only on your on-site assets during some periods of time. There will be time shifting initiatives in some cases. So as there are different sources of energy at different locations for a utility, and at some times of day, the power from the grid is either more expensive or less expensive, or cleaner or dirtier, having more or less carbon associated with it. And so there, you may want to go offline or online accordingly. There's also, in some cases, there are monetization opportunities with fast frequency response, and that's already being discussed with batteries now. And what that refers to is just using your on-site assets, using your batteries to support the grid. If the grid is becoming overloaded and frequency is dropping a bit, using your batteries to feed some power back into the grid to help correct it. Or likewise, if there's a surge in power, if a bunch of load has dropped off the utility and the frequency surges a little bit, that would be a time for the batteries to accept some of that charge. So these different type of sequences of operations to optimize to optimize your performance, optimize your monetization, or something that's going to be required. Another area, as we talk about using batteries, as I was just mentioning, in fast frequency response, or to support to support a demand response function, is battery life. So the more you cycle a battery, and the deeper you cycle a battery, the shorter the life. So there's a benefit to using your batteries to put power into the grid or draw power from the grid. So there's a monetary benefit for that, depending on the utilities program. But there's also a trade-off, and you're shortening that battery's life. And so there'll be a need to do those kind of analyses to find, what's the optimal use case. How much do we want to cycle the batteries to optimize the life and the monetary capabilities. And also, as we look at these different types of use cases, different type of architectures will come into play. So, as I'm sure you're aware, in most cases in data centers, the on-site assets are all at low voltage. They're operating at 480 in a modular fashion. There are some where they parallel at medium voltage, but as you think about, I'll use the battery as an example. If your primary use for batteries is to just maintain power to the servers in the event of some utility disturbances, then it's probably more practical to keep those at low voltage, keep them at 480, keep them to closer to the loads. However, if your primary reason for installing these batteries is to do this fast frequency response or do some of these grid support functions, then there may be benefits of locating them at medium voltage, actually closer to the source. If they're more to support the source, then it may make sense to locate them electrically closer to the source. So you may start seeing batteries located at medium voltage. And there are some sites in Europe where they're doing it. They have batteries installed at medium voltage. They're stuck through a transformer just for that purpose. So there's some value in experimenting with different types of architectures as well. And so to facilitate development in this, with a recognition that in data center, and not just data centers, this isn't just a data center dedicated asset, but all types of power systems. We see power systems having newer types of energy sources, fuel cells, gray usage of batteries, different operating sequences. So moving away from the model where your on-site assets are only used for emergency standby, different types of architectures, as we've talked about. Cummins has developed what we call our Power Integration Center, and it's basically just a lab where we can do all kinds of different types of microgrids. We can bring in different types of power sources. We have different types of loads can be brought in. I think that's important for data centers, maybe more so than other sites, because servers being fed through UPSs don't act like load banks. Everyone wants to test things with load banks, and they don't act like motors. Particularly where it becomes important, where if you're planning on powering servers directly from fuel cells, again, a lower inertia source that doesn't respond as quickly as a generator set, there is a need to do more, being able to test rather than a load bank, test your fuel cell with an actual server. So we have developed this lab at our facility in Fridley, Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis, to do just this. And so the single line that I have up here looks pretty complicated, and it kind of is, but what it is something that allows us to test many different architectures and many different sequences of operations without rewiring anything. We've got, and I'm going to show a video in a moment, but it shows us we've got all these breakers all configured in, and we don't have to, disconnect any wires. We just open and close the breakers to come up with different topologies and making it very easy to test. And so another point that I'll bring up here is we can test actual photovoltaics. We actually have some solar panels on the roof of that facility that feed into this, and under normal conditions, they're supplementing the factory load, so supplementing power from the grid. But we can also bring it in to test with this. But we also have photovoltaic and battery simulators on that site, so that we can simulate different conditions, different levels of irradiance with photovoltaic, right? With irradiance, is it perfectly sunny? Is it cloudy? Is it overcast? So we can simulate different levels there and test our inverters or loads with these different levels without having to wait for those conditions. And we have the same kind of simulators for batteries. So how will this system react when the batteries are at a high state of charge versus a low state of charge? We're able to make those changes and test a lot of inverters and different loads. And one of the interesting things that we're finding is not all inverters perform the same, and not all of them meet their data sheets in terms of how fast they sync, how well they do load acceptance. So these are the kinds of things that we're testing as we at Cummins, we're developing fuel cells. We have that technology. We're rolling them out into products. We're looking at different battery technologies. So this is something that we're doing for our own development and our own, developing our own capabilities and developing our own products. But we also want to work with partners, work with customers, work with inverter suppliers or battery suppliers, data center customers who want to bring in their servers. So we're opening this up as something that we can all use and learn from together. And so we have a kind of a video tour of the facility right here.
Welcome to Cummins. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Hear it?
So here in the control room, this is where we can visualize all of the different things in the lab. So on the left-hand screen, we've got the Cummins microgrid control system. So this is where you will have all of the different assets in the lab. You'll see their status. You can control them. You operate the system. On the right-hand side, this is where we gather all of the data. So in real time, we're taking voltage and current and power measurements and allowing our operators to see whether the whole power system is operating the way that it's supposed to.
Do you have an example of what a microgrid control configuration for a customer would look like?
Yeah, actually on our Fridley campus here, the whole campus itself is a microgrid. So I can go after this tour, walk you right over to that power system and show how it operates our entire manufacturing facility here. In the meantime, let's go check out the next room, which is the rest of the lab. So the next thing we're going to see is the microgrid switchgear, which is the center part of our Power Integration Center lab. This equipment is where we connect all the different assets in the lab. We've got utility source coming in, battery storage, solar. This is really just a bigger version of what you have in your house. So think of the circuit breaker panel in your house. It takes the utility power from the street, or maybe you have solar panel in your house, and it connects to your loads, your toaster, your oven, etc. Here's that same thing, just on a bigger scale. And this is where we bring all of those things together in testing microgrids. Over here is where we have all the controllers that remotely operate the circuit breakers in the microgrid switchgear. And inside these cabinets, we've left plenty of space to put different control systems, so we can swap out the entire thing based on the different customer applications. Up here's our solar test area. So this is where we have a DC solar simulator over there, and then area to put photovoltaic solar inverters.
So how is this system different than using the solar on the rooftop?
So there's a couple of ways that this is different. Number one, we have control of whether it's sunny or cloudy. We can simulate a sunny day or a cloudy day by loading different irradiance profiles into the solar simulator. Another thing that we can do is work with the load profiles and the forecast information that we get from our outside sources to recreate the same kind of sun situation and load situation that you might see at a customer site.
Oh, cool.
This piece of equipment is called the matrix switchgear, and it's very unique to the Power Integration Center lab. What we've done here is we've actually created a large matrix of connections between our different power assets. So the fuel cells, the generator set, the solar panels, the battery storage, they all come into this switchgear and then can be cross-connected in different combinations to build whatever topology that a customer might need.
So is this part of the package that I would expect to receive comments?
Typically, no. This is unique to the lab. So what this allows us to do is create those different setups for you, but then in your actual solution, it would be something much more streamlined and simple. So you asked me before about what a system might look like at your actual facility. So here we are. This is the real system that we use to operate for the campus. So the manufacturing floor, all of the offices, this microgrid control system operates that entire facility. So this is exactly kind of what you would expect to get at your site. Here in the outdoor area of the lab, this is where we have all of the different connection pads for our different power assets. So we have 5 pads that are capable of up to 500 kilowatts each, and we have 2 pads that are capable of 2 megawatts each. I really enjoyed giving the tour to Jen today. Got a lot of great questions, a lot of questions I've seen from other customers in a variety of different applications, from healthcare to data centers to remote communities, all looking for how they can achieve their sustainability goals. And it's really fun to be able to bring them to our facility in Minnesota and work together to figure out what is a microgrid today, what does that look like in the future, and how we can work together.
There we go. All right, operator. All right. So that in summary, you saw Corey kind of invited everyone, and I'm inviting you to that. This is, we are serious about this. We do want people to come out. We're happy to work with you if you have inverters or operating sequences you want to test or other equipment. So that to sum up, we do see data centers moving to new use cases for their power, both their primary power and their on-site power. And so we've developed this power integration center, this lab, to help deploy different microgrids and develop the sequences of operations, and also to help in our own product development. And just to sum up the capabilities that we have, if you are interested in bringing equipment, and Corey mentioned this, but I'll say it again, we have our 2 large pads that are capable of, that have 2 megawatt load banks with them, so they could have up to a 2 megawatt generator set. We have either diesel or gas, so if you want to have a gas generator set in that microgrid. And we also have some smaller pads with 500 kilowatt load banks. That kind of fit a 20-foot enclosure can fit on that. And so we also would be interested in testing, loads with UPS, server loads with UPS, to see how that works with different assets, and again, fitting them in a container and putting them out on the pad. We can accommodate that as well. So on that point, I guess I'll open it up for questions. Are there any questions, comment? Yes.
If you have questions, please use the microphones on the tables. Just turn on the switch and wait about 2 seconds before you start speaking.
Okay, can you hear me, Rich? Yeah, I guess you can. Leonard Ruff. So quick question, going back to the battery backup, as far as utility level, customer level, I guess, could you expand on that a little bit? What are you seeing out there in industry, or maybe we pull Steve into this conversation too? Are you seeing more utilities start to go to a utility level, kind of back up megawatt, gigawatt type stuff, combination with users? Or I guess, what are you seeing develop in kind of that market for that level of storage for renewables?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So what are we seeing in utilities doing? So you can kind of segment batteries when you talk about utility scale as being in front of the meter or behind the meter, right? So if it's something that is on a site that has a lot of photovoltaic or wind, that that would be considered in front of the meter. So we see some of that in kind of an experimental mode. When we look at behind the meter, so something that a customer owns, we're not seeing large amounts of that, but we are seeing, some operators are starting to incorporate it behind the meter, so incorporating it on site, so that there's some of that going on. I would say it's kind of in its infancy right now, so there isn't a whole lot of it. One thing I touched on earlier, I think you were getting at this a little bit, where you asked about being close to the loads, being closer to the source. I don't know if that was something that you were asking about, but what we did see, we have seen not to a great extent or at scale, but having batteries at medium voltage and providing some of the ancillary services, some of the fast frequency response, using batteries for that. So I think it's a very it's a very interesting time for batteries and energy storage, and I think that kind of ecosystem with batteries is going to be changing, because we are seeing a lot of experimentation with different uses for batteries. So if we look at data centers now, they all have batteries right now, and their purpose is to maintain power to the servers in the event of a utility outage, and that can either be incorporated as part of the UPS, or some of you may be familiar with the open compute project types of system that Meta and some of the others are doing, where they're located right in the server racks. But that's the use today. But as we move forward, I see two more use cases, and again, these are more in experimental than really operating at scale. But one is, as we talked about, monetization opportunities, using them to provide fast frequency response or to go offline. Potentially in some data center applications, they talk about expanding the amount of batteries on site in the event of a utility failure, and then using kind of a network resiliency. So migrating a lot of the workloads to another location rather than investing so much money in generator sets. So supporting the utility is one other use case, and then the other use of batteries, as we see going forward, is to support assets like fuel cells. So we talk with data centers that want to get rid of their diesel generators and want to replace them with hydrogen fuel cells. The fuel cells don't have the kind of load acceptance characteristic as a diesel generator set. They don't come online as fast. They can't pick up the load steps that a diesel generator set can pick up. So supporting them with batteries is a way that you kind of provide that inertia that a diesel generator has and a fuel cell lacks by having that battery. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I see one use for batteries today, which is maintaining power to the servers, migrating to 3 uses in the future. One being supporting low inertia assets like a fuel cell to have the same diesel-like performance, and also monetization and opportunities by supporting a grid that is a little unstable or intermittent because of renewables. So we're seeing some of that again at medium voltage. We're seeing some in Europe, but I wouldn't say it's a large scale where you have batteries supporting the grid that way. So I don't know, did that help? I rambled a bit, but okay.
Chris is asking, have any customers built an on-site generation plant that larger than their load so they could backfeed the utility?
No data centers that I am aware of have done that. I mean, I think that's something you might see in other types of applications, but, most data centers that the power, the footprint, the power intensity is so large, it's, I think it's a challenge to just get large enough. Now, one thing that you might be able to look up is, Microsoft some years ago built a gas power plant out in Wyoming. And I think the idea is that would, if there was excess, serve the community as well. I haven't heard much about that lately, but yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Follow my own direction here.
Mhm.
Microsoft is doing some stuff with hydrogen
Yep.
fuel cells, and we're still waiting to see what they actually do.
Well, yeah, they did a successful pilot, 3 megawatt fuel cell, which is their node of generator set, and they were able to match the performance. So they're convinced of the technology.
Yeah.
Now it's a question
Now they
of
got to figure out how to make
who can build them
hydrogen.
who can build them at scale, and how can you get hydrogen? And by the way, if it's not green hydrogen, most hydrogen today is derived from fossil fuels, so it's
Yep.
not. But it's interesting. I think those are all questions that can be answered. I overheard a conversation earlier about electric cars, and are those really better for the environment? If you think about the whole supply chain and recycling, and is the electric car is only as clean as the electricity you generate. So if you're getting it from coal, is it an improvement? But I think you take the first step in developing the technology anyway. And I think the same can be said with hydrogen fuel cells. You take the first step and develop that fuel cell technology, and the technology works, but it's a matter of being able to produce it at scale. So you get that technology produced ahead of the green hydrogen ecosystem. So it doesn't all happen at once, but these are all pieces that have to happen. If that.
Okay, perfect. And the second question, high frequency battery supplement. How does it work with utility permits? Also, does it monitor a dip up to a small predetermined level? And if it goes below, then cut power?
Okay, so in terms of utility permits, how I see that there, and obviously every utility is a little bit different, but IEEE 1547 and also a lot of European grid codes require that assets that are going to connect to the grid have some type of frequency response, an inverter that's connected to the grid. So in terms of utility permits, obviously not every utility has adopted IEEE 1547, or in Europe, they haven't all adopted those grid codes, but that is part of IEEE 1547 for some types of inverter-based generation, that they have that capability. So what the basic function is, and that there's different variations of it, but basically if it's based more on the frequency rather than power. So if the frequency of the utility dips, that's a symptom of the utility being overloaded. And so the fast frequency response that a battery or other inverter source would do is then inject power into the grid. Okay. And conversely, if the frequency goes above some level, that's a symptom of a bunch of load has dropped off the grid. And there is where you would be looking for batteries to bring it down by absorbing power in that case. So it's not a large change in frequency. It's tenths of a hertz that when they start operating. So it's kind of a fast frequency response. And so that's something that would happen before you start doing load shedding. So the idea is you have this fast frequency response to support the grid, so you don't have to shed load. But shedding the load is a secondary. So it was a person online. So yeah.
Answer your question? Maybe not. Well, he hasn't responded. So, all right. Anybody else in the room?
Does it work? There we go.
Yep.
Tiff again with the Vertiv. Can you, your test facility is fascinating to me. Can you describe a little bit more about what you maybe a customer visit? I mean, what do they bring in? What are they testing? Can you walk us through that? I'm just curious as to how that facility gets used and what somebody might do there.
Yeah. Say there's a customer that that has an inverter that they want to try in a particular, some kind of particular sequence of operations with some type of load. So you could bring in that inverter, and we have, whatever power source you want to use with that. So we could have, well, we actually have PV on the roof, but we also have a PV simulator or a battery simulator to see how it would work with that battery. Or a customer could bring in their own battery, and they could bring in their own loads. Right? We have load banks, but thinking specifically in a data center, servers don't act the same as load banks. Right? You're ramping load. They're an active power load, meaning, like if the voltage drops, the frequency increases, and, that wreaks a little bit of a havoc on generators and picking them up. So they could bring, you bring an enclosure with some of these servers. So, how looking at the photo that I have right now. So if they had an inverter could go inside. If they had a battery, they could put a battery on one of these pads. They could put their, an enclosure full of servers or some other type of load on one of these pads. With that kind of matrix switchgear, we could develop pretty much any type of architecture they want. It could just be a common bus. Maybe you have a main type of architecture that they want to look at, and we can program pretty much any type of operating sequence. So, for example, if they have an inverter and they want to test how well it syncs, if it's a grid following inverter, how well it syncs to the grid, how long it actually takes to sync and pick up load, or if it's a grid forming inverter, and you want it to be just a standby source, we could measure how long it takes for that inverter to come up and form that 480 volts. So there are a lot of possibilities for doing that. I will point out that this is something new. So we've only commissioned it this summer. So we haven't had a whole lot of customers out, but we would certainly entertain any types of testing you would be interested in doing. Again, we have diesel and gas generator sets. It's plumbed for that. We have load banks on the site, but we certainly would be happy to take a load from a customer and see what they wanted to do. We've tested several different inverters, but we're always interested in seeing more. Does that help, or you want to talk about?
No, I was,
Fascinating. Hot mic there. I was fascinated by just the level of complexity. So our company has something in a completely different industry, but very similar. And I know the great expense that it took for us to set something of that scale up. And so I just, that's what fascinated me about it. Just all the things you had to do behind the scenes to create something that was so flexible to test all these different types of systems coming in. I was just wondering what customers had taken advantage of it. One of the things I could potentially see is for folks that build out on massive scales, wanting to test small pilots before they build something in the field in a remote location or whatnot. I'm just thinking about the massive increase that we're seeing with 5G capability in a lot of remote locations. A lot of those folks have generators. They don't always have the grid. They're looking to get more sustainable. I would imagine it would be much easier to test in a place like this than a place like the middle of nowhere, Montana, or wherever they're looking about it.
Or at a customer site. And that's, it's interesting. So the guy who did the tour in the video, the guy named Corey Bergendahl, his old job is he commissioned paralleling systems. And so he talks about how great this is to be able to, debug the sequence of operations and do all of that in our lab rather than go out on a site and have to, to figure it out there. So that's something as we work, and this again isn't just in data centers, but as we start to deploy microgrids, be able to, to simulate all the sequences, in our facility. you know, it is a big advantage. You know, we do kind of look at an analogy of how we do a lot of switchgear. You know, we do a lot of switchgear systems, and we're trying to, as much as we can, simulate all the possible sequences in that genset paralleling switchgear in Fridley. We want to try to do the same thing with microgrids. The other point I would make about the expense is just kind of saying that in terms of new power, in terms of fuel cells and alternative sources of energy and running things on battery, Cummins is all in. We do see that. You know, we don't see diesel engines going away anytime soon, but we see other technologies ramping up, and we are making those investments, and that's part of making these investments, you know, to be a power partner, not just your diesel engine supplier. Are you like steel third? I see signals there.
So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them, you know, we'll be around. Okay, thank you.
All right, folks, time to get started again. We have a panel discussion on the topic of water usage efficiency in the data center. And we have 3 panelists today. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, and then I'll throw it over to Doug Boers, our chapter president, who will moderate the panel.
Hello, everyone. Seth Davis. I'm a senior mechanical engineer for McKinstry. Been in the industry over 24 years and the lead mechanical engineer for our mission critical group at McKinstry.
I'm Tiff Gannon. I'm with Vertiv out of Columbus, Ohio. I've been also in the HVAC industry for 20 plus years. For a long period of time, I was in applied systems and controls. Moved over to Vertiv in about 2010 or so, and been focused on the data center industry since then. I really serve in a technical sales / portfolio management role for Vertiv, but focus primarily on the thermal management business, specifically larger data centers, but do have a great deal of experience in smaller ones also.
It takes time. So my name is Ehsan Nasser. I'm part of a data center advanced development team at Microsoft, and my role is basically working on a technology ranging from energy, power, and water for the future future of the data center. And my background is in electrical engineering and control, but I'm interested in any aspect of innovation in a data center, and that's why I'm here.
I don't see myself on the screen, but this is Doug Boers. Can people hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I've been of the opinion that the technology curve is going to level off. We're going to end up with a world that has less of this exponential growth. But so far, I've been absolutely wrong, and let me demonstrate that for a moment. November 15th is the official date of the world getting to 8 billion people. So this is the day we can celebrate that. In 2015, 3.9 billion people had access to internet. In 2023, the expectation is 5.3 billion people will have access to internet. But at the same time, there will be 29.3 billion devices connected. So as I say, so far we have not slowed growth. The technical aspect of water use in data centers in North America is about 0.3% of the overall water consumption, which sounds like a small number. But given that the growth is still exponential, and given that the use of water by data centers is very much uneven across the country, and in some cases impacts places where water is already short, it's become a very important topic. And that's part of the reason why we're discussing it this evening. We're talking about the balance of water consumption, of energy utilization, and of data effectiveness, all in the same mix in a combination of measures. And I expect to hear some of that this evening in the next few minutes. There's three ways or three tiers of discussion. First off, is you define either a metric or some way to measure things, or you invent one. That is pretty well established in the last 2 or 3 years. You talk about how you design and implement systems that use less water. That's quite well established. You talk about leveraging those solutions so that you can operate them to the best of your ability. So I don't know if you're in order on the stage since I'm not seeing you, but Seth, if you'd like, please begin.
Yeah, that is a big topic, and I think very relevant. It seems like there are many technologies that can be used to cool a data center, and we're kind of seeing the limits of each technology. So recently, I'd say in the data center designs that we've seen that have gone through our office, there's been a transition of going from a heavy water user in a direct evap or indirect evap cooling applications to more of water-cooled chiller or air-cooled chillers type of scenario that is a lot less intensive on the water use. And, there are trade-offs for that. PUE is definitely, it's tough to compete with a direct evap unit in terms of PUE. However, there's a trade-off in you use a lot of water. It's millions and millions of gallons of water that's being used that needs to be drained, and it's becoming not only a burden on the maintenance of these big campuses and big facilities, but also the municipalities that feed the water, they're kind of running out of capacity too. So we've definitely seen a transition recently to a different type of system that has less water intensive use. Now, trade-offs, it's tough to get a similar PUE performance with, say, an air-cooled chiller than you can with a direct evap or indirect evap air handling unit type of approach. But the trade-offs seem to be worth it for a lot of our clients. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. One of the things that I think about, I would agree that in terms of PUE, a direct evaporative system really sets the standard by which every other system continues to be evaluated against, because that represents the peak in terms of efficiency. I would also say it represents in many ways the peak in terms of upfront capital cost. The reason for that, I would say, is because if you think about what is HVAC, what is heat transfer, fundamentally for anything in the HVAC world, it's the process of compression and phase change with a refrigerant. So the most efficient way to operate any cooling system for any application is to reduce or eliminate the usage of a compressor. The other thing that I would say on top of that is the cheapest one would be to be one that has the smallest or the least used or does not have a compressor at all. So once again, when you look at direct evaporative system, that's why it sets that standard, if you will. What we've seen is, in some ways, as servers continually get more robust, and they're able to handle much wider ranges of conditions, and the people that operate them continue to become much more comfortable operating them at the extremes and take advantage of that robustness, we are starting to see some significant benefits of other technologies that don't use water, but they take advantage of much higher temperatures, if you will, and coming off of the servers themselves. They operate the system at a higher temperature. Why does that matter? Because even though it's not direct air from outside going across the server and exiting the building, it does have some heat transfer processes along the way. You can establish or accomplish a lot of that without the use of a compressor. And so that helps you get pretty far into saving some energy. Now, I would say, as you can imagine, you set up a system with a compressor that can handle the worst situation in the year, and then you don't operate very much. It doesn't save you much in terms of upfront capital. So as Seth said, there is a trade-off. I think, I'll maybe speak for Seth, but also probably echo what we had earlier today. I would say sustainability and efficiency, it is not necessarily something you can arrive at and say, I did this right. It is really, you're looking at a variety of different metrics. They're different for every owner, for every municipality, for every business case and usage case. And then from there, it gives you a variety of things to consider. What are appropriate systems? What are appropriate strategies? What are appropriate sites? And then when you look at all of that, you can make the best decision as to what makes sense for that project. But to say that there is a right answer that's always the right thing, that's perhaps a broad statement. I'd maybe be a bit skeptical if somebody said that to me.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting topic and discussion. And I completely agree. But we looked at a different perspective overall for a cooling system. If we are going to zoom out the overall system and what we are going to achieve, one aspect is a sustainability and resources that we have, including energy and water. And as we've talked, this is the trade-off between energy and like a PUE or WUE. But basically, if you're going to zoom out, the first step is basically what type of a technology is available in order to achieve one goal. If energy in some area is more important, we can use the right technology to gain the efficiency better at the energy, to gain better PUE. And in some location, if there is the issue on the water, we're more focusing on a right technology to achieve to have a less water density in those areas. But if we go more than or beyond the WE or PUE, what we looked at Microsoft, we looked at the ecosystem as a whole. Basically, if the data center is part of the community or part of the nature, how the impact of energy and water can play around with the surrounding area. And that is a key challenge and aspect that we are trying to solve and address and see what is the right technology for every aspect, either through changing of the technologies or from a different aspect, like either a evap or a chiller or even immersion cooling that we are trying to use, or any type of a technology and the control system, maybe AI, that we do have some program on the AI section. But at the end of the day, that's a key question or the statement of that data center, including all the aspects, as a part of the whole ecosystem. And if we are trying to solve the point solution for only one aspect, we may lose the other aspect of the whole system. And that is, I think, the North Star is just trying to have a bigger picture.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like that you brought up the holistic view and the whole ecosystem of the data center, because there's definitely been a lot of discussion lately on changes from the IT side that are going to help the HVAC side and the cooling side with direct liquid cooling with immersion cooling. And if those changes happen, that could greatly benefit the water usage. Because if we go to facility temperatures instead of 60 to 80 degrees, if they're bumping up to over 100 degrees, then the opportunity for dry economizer, water side economizer, is greatly enhanced. Where, yes, you may still have evaporative cooling needed for those peak days, but now you're talking about a very small wedge of the overall temperatures and conditions that we see in those in these data centers. So that type of a shift in the IT could have a great impact in overall water usage holistically in our ecosystem of a data center.
This is Doug again. I'm curious if any of you have an example of a local water utility or a demanding individual that made water the most important topic.
We have in one of the projects and one of the campus that we do a lot of work on, the city of Wenatchee has actually raised the red flag to this campus where they are saying the city can't take any more water discharge. And so from there, we are needing to work with the facility to try to improve the efficiency of that water usage because their system depends on water usage and evaporative cooling. But we're trying to put in measures to enhance that efficiency, decrease the discharge because the city can't take as much. They have limitations in their infrastructure.
I keep jumping the gun on this. From a national perspective, because I'm not actually local, I have more of a national role. And what you're seeing in the city of Wenatchee is being, well, one, it's very much a concern, even if it's not an official red flag, for much of the country west of the Mississippi. The thought of using significant amounts of water for a data center in many parts of the western U.S. is almost a non-starter at this point. And now some of it, though, what's really very interesting, we're seeing that on the East Coast too, where water's not necessarily a problem. But we're also seeing it being brought up by people that are operating the facilities saying, I have no idea what the future might bring in terms of environmental factors, but also regulatory factors. And so what you talked about earlier and what's unique about our industry is there is a component of risk that needs to be analyzed and inputted into our equations. As we think about what is possible and what we need to do, risk is a significant part of that. Great example in terms of what Seth said. So why do we want to have nice, cool temperatures at 60 degrees? Well, we think that the IT space, the machines in there, the servers, would operate most efficiently and most reliably there. And that's for the most part true. But as they get more capable, we can operate at much more efficient spaces for the entire facility with a comparable amount of risk that we used to have when things were 60 degrees. So as we think about operating our facilities, what we need to be thinking about also is what level of risk am I saying I'm willing to tolerate? If you have the ability to shift load from one facility to the next seamlessly in a way that doesn't disrupt the operations, maybe that's your risk model. And all of a sudden you don't factor in risk to one specific site. So you can design much more aggressively for efficiency. It's something to be thinking about. And the unique thing is, I would say the industry is changing dramatically fast. So what might be intolerable today might be very tolerable tomorrow.
I agree with you, Steve. Basically, we had one interesting project in Phoenix because in a data center that we added in Phoenix, there are area that like is important for us how we can have a efficient on it, like the water use case. And in that particular example, just back to your point, that we ran to the like a loss of a server data and the hardware and see if the industry wisdom is about talking about to have a lower temperature. Operating the server at the lower temperature is better. Is it the really true, or we need to see what is the real impact that on a server? And we ended up to have even running at the higher temperature at some extent, there is less failure on a server in general, not running at the lower temperature. And we just had a couple of pilot projects to increase the temperature from 85 to from 10 degrees. And we ended up to, like, we did some calculation. Overall, it can save up to 55%, 60% the water saving. But the question is that, is it robust enough for all the data center or not? And that is a kind of a solution that we needed to look at and see based on the different server and SLA and all the specification and also the health and safety from an operator, is it going to be achievable or not? That's a kind of a control aspect of a data center. I believe there is a huge opportunity inside of the current data center, depending on the technology that they're going to use. And there are lots of opportunity by changing only the control temperature or RH or some other control set point that is available, and it can a huge opportunity there. But if you're going to changing from one location to the another location, the question is back to see, okay, considering all the risk factor, what is the right control parameter that we can run in order to achieve the better efficiency in general?
One thing that comes to mind when you talk about that is one thing that we see in data center spaces is the worst common denominator controls the entire facility. And if we can get smarter in terms of what are the individual needs, and if there are a group of servers that have more stringent needs, let's segregate those servers and provide a separate system for them so we can optimize the rest of the facility and not have this limited group be the worst common denominator that is forcing the entire system to a less efficient operation.
I'm going to do this.
I'm missing a bit of information, which is rough order of magnitude. How costly is water in an evaporative system compared to energy?
That is a really good question. I don't have exact numbers on that. It vastly depends on where you're talking about, like what part of the country, how much is your electricity, how much is your cost of water. Honestly, in the Northwest, we have the luxury of relatively cheap power and in a lot of cases, abundance of water. So I haven't heard the cost of the water being as much. It's the cost of the discharge I hear is really driving up prices. And the infrastructure that the cities need to bring in, the municipalities need to bring in to get rid of this industrial cold water that is needed.
All right, I got it this time. If I were to think back anecdotally to performance runs or analysis that we've done for what I would describe as indirect evaporative systems. So in those systems, you want to look at annual energy consumption, but also annual water consumption, because the point at which you turn on your water on an annual basis will determine, you can have the system be a little bit more efficient and consume more water. You could have it be a little bit less efficient and consume less water. But when I go back and I look at those dollar amounts in most places, and I'm shooting from the hip a little bit, it felt like a 10-to-1 ratio. But I would agree with Seth, it wasn't the water that was consumed, It was what the local municipality wanted to charge to do it. And if you had to bring in additional utility feeds to handle it, then you're talking a pretty substantial one-time cost. I'm thinking specifically in the Bay Area, Santa Clara, San Jose, that entire area. Santa Clara is incredibly attractive to people to build facilities in because it has its own dedicated power grid and power utility. However, the city and the water situation makes it very challenging at times. So in that analysis, the water didn't contribute a lot financially, but it contributed far more in terms of the risk of what might happen in the future. There was a question of what happens if you lose water, what happens if the authority restricts the amount you have. There was a lot of unknowns with that, whereas the power part, even though it costs more, really didn't have much risk associated with it. So that was the challenging thing that a lot of folks developing the sites would have to evaluate how comfortable I am with the risk that I'm taking on regarding water.
There's also a first cost component to that too, because if we are designing these data centers to a tier 3 redundancy, that should include the water infrastructure too. So that equates to very, very big tanks on campus, which have not only a big first cost component to them, but there's a maintenance component to them too to keep the upkeep.
This is the cost. The cost topic is a very, very interesting topic, because once we were talking about why our group, basically the development team, is focusing on the water, that's the question we were asked, why you're focusing on that aspect, because the water is cheap. Why you are talking about this stuff? Because even on a calculation part, if you're comparing the water cost, again, depending on the location, it can be a different energy and water. But typically, I think that is it. If we are looking at only from a cost perspective, we're going to lose a whole picture, because there are lots of other elements is going to impact the water. Some location, we may not to grow data center in some location because of the access to the to the connection that we can resource for a cooling, and that is the enablement of a data center in general, and kind of a risk factor that that has been talked about. What are the risks that we can use the water for a cooling of a data center in general, not only the cost. And also, there is a cost factor that we will have it, but there is other factor that is a community perception, other factor in the location that we are. There are lots of factor can impact on a cost of the system that we're going to have. And back to the comparing to the energy cost, I believe still there are some optimization that can trade off, if that is only based on the water, or that is only based on the energy, or that is depending on the location, is just a trade-off if you wanted to achieve based on the optimization based on the energy or water or both, or the other factor can be embedded to the system. We may have a different operation scheme or have a different scenario in that case. I believe that's a kind of a combination of a different element can come together and ended up have a final solution for each side.
Okay, I think I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. And Bill, if you can guide folks to use the microphone, that'd be great.
So reflecting on my time working for Liebert in Southern California, I remember when the utilities were talking about reducing water consumption and things like that, and how that impacted static in these facilities. As we move towards more water conservation, how do you feel like that whole static relative humidity conversation is going to come into this whole topic?
When you compare the water usage of the humidification needed in wintertime to the cooling usage, it's a very, very small percent. So I don't think the keeping humidification in a data center in the wintertime, although is that holistically, if we can move that requirement lower, I think that helps everything. But it doesn't move the needle as much as cooling in a data center does.
Hey, Leonard here. So a couple things. So to touch on Santa Clara, I was recently working on a project down there and they were redoing their whole water, not supply, but discharge system model. And it really put the mechanical engineers in a tight space because data centers I was working on down there were based on a direct VAP and a lot of water coming off those, even that's not being evaporated, of course. So to go back to the earlier question about, you know, what's more important, the power or the water, I think, Seth, you mentioned it depends on where you are, which is a big deal. I mean, it's one thing if we're out in Quincy or if we're here in Linwood or Seattle versus somewhere that's experiencing a drought and water is a precious commodity, power may not be. That's going to have a very direct effect on those system calculations. So I think to make your point was, we'll have to have a balance. I don't know if that's a combined metric that's PUE and WE, or we have to look at both. And it depends on where you are. It's like retail, it's like location, because it's all driven not only by the site chart, but it is driven by the power and the water and discharge availability. One significant project over in Quincy, for instance, we had to add a water treatment facility because we were flushing out the municipal system with the water that was too clean because they depended on the bacterial system and we were just flushing it right out. So we actually had to add treatment to prevent that. So that's a big deal because I think you go into a lot of these rural, smaller communities, they're not used to this this industry. They don't really have a good grasp of what is going to happen to them.
The municipality definitely drives a lot of how to operate these systems, whether it's what do you treat the water with? Are you hooking up to the sanitary or the storm? Because it's such clean water, there's sometimes a desire to hook up to the storm. And so it's such a conversation because of the millions and millions of gallons that a large data center can draw and discharge into the municipality and their system and draw from their system.
Just a quick follow on that. There is another thing that I think we as an industry will have to address, and that's the perception of not only the municipalities, but of the citizenship in these areas. I worked on a project over by Walla Walla that was going to be a 12 megawatt containerized crypto kind of build out. It basically got shot down by the county because there was citizen opposition to the water discharge. They were worried that somehow we were putting bad chemicals into the water and it was going to mess up their system when, you know, it was a direct evap system. You know, it was just water. It was cleaner than what they use after you've, you know, rinsed your dishes at night. But there was a perception, there was a resistance, and it shot down the project. So as an industry, we have to be sensitive to those water issues because it's real to them. People maybe don't have such a great idea about power usage and PUE, and we throw around those a lot of terms, but if we're talking about polluting their water, or they think we're talking about polluting their water, it's a big deal. Or if we're going to use up their water and now they can't water their lawn, they're going to be ticked.
Doug had a question that he typed in. Has the concern about water caused people to revisit day/night cold storage solutions? I'm presuming, Doug, and you can shake your head up and down, you're talking about something like Apple in Dayton, North Carolina? Okay, and he shakes yes. Okay.
I think one of the advantages of moving away from a direct water usage type of system and more to a piped chiller type of system is it allows more opportunity for other usage of that heat, be it through heat recovery, through other types of storage. When you're using a direct evap or indirect evap system, trying to apply that technology and that approach is much, much harder. Whereas if you have, a chilled water system, the pipes are there and it's more becomes a piping project as opposed to implementing a whole new system into your facility. And not to talk too much about immersion cooling, but if new technologies come along, the warmer that chilled water temperature gets, the easier it is, the better quality heat that we have in our system and can be used for other applications.
Couple of comments. When we start talking about hyperscalers, and we start talking about failing over from one location to another, fiber latency is critical. That makes it difficult to say, hey, I'm going to flip everything over to this other building. I used to work for a company that did that all the time, but they had limitations. I can only go so far. If I want to be in this particular geographical location, but I really can't flip across from, let's say, a very popular data center area called, I don't know, Northern Virginia, and say Texas. Doesn't work as well. So that's one of the challenges with being able to do any kind of failover. We used to call it follow the sun, follow the moon. I mean, there's a whole bunch of names for it. The other challenge, I think, is that when we talk about raising the temperature in the data center, it's not just whether the IT equipment can handle it. It's what the OEMs are willing to warrant. That's been critical. And I know that in the past, at least, people have tried to get the OEMs through ASHRAE to change the psychometric chart, to widen it, to broaden it. I don't know, have they done anything recently? I haven't been keeping track.
It's been gradually widened over time. I mean, I think if you look 10 years ago at the recommended temperatures and relative humidity conditions, they're narrower than they are now. So it seems like every edition there's changes that are happen. It happens on a smaller scale. One thing to note, that chart in ASHRAE, it's actually generated, that the committee that produces that chart, it's generated by the server manufacturers. It's not by the engineers like me that are trying to push, hey, can we warm this? Can we turn the needle a little bit more?
Yep.
So
I'm familiar with the TC 9.9 committee.
Yeah.
So yeah, I knew how they were set up, but that was one concern, is that, back before TC 9.9 existed, back when HTAs were 250 pounds and they would tolerate a maximum of 5-degree delta T per hour. Now, of course, things are a lot different, but we still have those temperature and humidity constraints. So anyway, all right. Does anybody else in the room have?
So
Go ahead.
one comment here is one thing is about the engineering aspect of what can be done at a server or at the hardware side, and another thing is about the perception of the engineer, how they understand if that IT equipment can handle that kind of environment. And that's a kind of, I think, is a kind of a cultural thing to understand if we do have the massive headroom inside of the hardware currently with the current technology right there. but it's still, there are some pushback from operator and the people that they are working on it to see, okay, probably it's better to have a relaxed environment, better environment for the hardware, because generally there is a belief that it should be operated at the better condition, not the higher temperature. And I think as it gradually is going to shift to the what the actual specification through the data, through showing all the information to just confirm that the hardware is going to work at the higher temperature, ended up to have a better water efficiency.
The only other problem there is OSHA gets involved with, gee, it's 110 degrees in my data center and my people can't work.
Cool suits.
No water in the data center, I'm sorry. Have to be, engineered. to do it.
DX cool
3M
suits.
makes some good stuff. All right, does anybody else in the room have questions? Going once, twice? Sold. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists.
Thanks, everybody on the Teams call, and Jim?
We thank you all for attending. We'll be back late February, mid-March next year, and you'll be hearing from us. So thank you and good night.